At EVO this past August, a man who goes by the handle Blind Warrior Sven won his Street Fighter set live on the main stage. As you can probably figure from his name, Sven is blind. Despite this, through the use of Street Fighter VI's numerous accessibility options, he was able to take home a win at one of the most competitive fighting game tournaments in the world. It's a fact that games are designed with able players like me in mind. Those with impairments, physical or otherwise, may struggle with basic tasks in everyday life, let alone video games. Sven's win is so important as it showcases the power of accessibility in video games. Before we dive too far into this topic, I find it important to note that I am fortunate enough to be an able-bodied person with a fascination with these features, and not somebody who these features are designed for. I can't necessarily fully comment on how useful they are in practice, but I've gone out of my way to seek out testimonials and feedback from gamers with disabilities to gauge how good or impactful these features are. Accessibility features in games have always been so intriguing to me ever since I noticed that these options existed, and the rabbit hole goes deeper than you may think. It's important to note that when I talk about accessibility, I'm referring to features or even hardware that allow one who normally wouldn't be able to engage with the game to properly enjoy it. More often than not, it pertains to a disability, but there are instances of accessibility that pertains to preferences like catering to certain phobias. My favorite instance of this is Obsidian's Grounded, which features some really interesting options for those with arachnophobia. The game features large spider enemies that the player can make look anywhere from some genuinely freaky looking spiders to... oh yeah, I like this guy. Accessibility features don't just end at this dude though. Sometimes, even able-bodied gamers take advantage of these features like remapping controls or enabling subtitles, or sometimes even more remote cases like providing a descriptive audio track or overlays for those with color blindness. In the case of Street Fighter VI, there exists an option that allows players to activate a chime that differs in speed and pitch depending on your proximity to the opponent. This is the very feature that allowed Sven to take the win. One instance of a more specific accessibility feature I find super interesting is Forza Horizon 5 having the option for players to enable a sign language interpreter for both American Sign Language and British Sign Language. Not only did I learn that there's a pretty big difference between American Sign Language and British Sign Language, but there's also a story in the Forza Horizon games, apparently. The consensus seems to be that this is a super cool idea, but not necessarily in the game that takes advantage of such a feature the most. I personally would love to see this feature in a more story-focused game. Speaking of, when it comes to accessibility features, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Sony has been on top of the game. Insomniac and Naughty Dog all have extensive options to help make the experience easier for folks who may need it. In The Last of Us Part 2, for example, some features are as simple as allowing for holds instead of button mashing, or automatically picking up items, but get in-depth and allow for changing enemy AI in combat to make sure they don't flank you, or even outright reducing their accuracy. The recently released Spider-Man 2 has many of the same options that allow players to skip puzzles, change the shader on enemies to make them stick out more, and so on. If there's any sort of industry standard when it comes to accessibility features in games, it should be this. In fact, GameAccessibilityGuidelines.com is a collaborative project between different studios and experts to create a set of standards that ranges from basic features that require little work to implement to more advanced features that require a little bit more elbow grease. These are put in place for devs to familiarize themselves with and to have in mind while creating their games to ensure more people can tailor the experience to their liking. Accessibility goes beyond just features, though. When we think of accessibility in games, we often tend to think of these features cropping up in the past few years. But what if I told you there was a game designer creating games for the blind years before Capcom or Naughty Dog, in the realm of visual novels, no less? Okay, hold on, let me explain. Kenji Eno created the first audio game for home consoles with his 1997 game Real Sound, Kaze no Regret, or Winds of Regret in English. Think of the game like an interactive audio drama. Players listen to the characters talk, and players are prompted to make a choice when they hear wind chimes that will determine how the plot will play out, all without needing the screen to play at all. The game uses music, sound, and voice acting to set the tone, which slots it firmly into the sound novel genre of visual novels. This one particularly light on the visual and leaning a lot more toward novel. Kenji Eno, known for his work on D and Enemy Zero, among other games, got the idea for Kaze no Regret after blind fans sent him letters of appreciation. I had a chance to visit people who are visually disabled, and I learned that there are blind people who play action games. Of course, blind people are not able to have the full experience, and they're kind of trying to force themselves to be able to play, but they're making the effort. So I thought that if you turn off the monitor, both of you are just hearing the game. So after you finish the game, you can have an equal conversation about it with a blind person. That's an inspiration behind Real Sound Kaze no Regret as well. Kenji Eno even bargained with Sega for the exclusive rights to the game, in exchange for Sega giving 1,000 Saturns to blind gamers. Eno, of course, agreed and gave 1,000 copies of Kaze no Regret to go with the Saturns to put the game in the hands of blind gamers. Kenji Eno is one of my biggest inspirations, and his work on Kaze no Regret is what got me interested in the idea of accessibility in video games in the first place. Although he passed away in 2013, I'm sure Eno would be proud of the advancements that have been made for accessibility in the past few years that allow more people to enjoy games. One of the bigger roadblocks for disabled gamers are the controllers themselves. They're one of the most important parts of playing video games since they're how you interface with the game itself, and those with disabilities or even conditions like carpal tunnel may have issues with holding a controller for extended periods of time. Microsoft and Sony have thrown their hat into the ring to help remedy this issue through their adaptive controller for the Xbox family of consoles and the Access controller for the PS5, which releases next month at the time of writing this. These controllers are specifically designed to be customizable so that gamers with disabilities can play for longer. These controllers even have ports that allow players to create their own inputs outside of the controller itself to accommodate for all types of disabilities. There even exist third-party controllers made by companies such as Hori or 8BitDo that are designed to be accessible. Oddly enough, Nintendo has yet to throw their hat into the ring to create their own adaptive controller, but there do exist adapters to make the Xbox adaptive controller usable on Switch, as well as the aforementioned third-party controllers which also work on the Switch, so there are some solutions. Reviews for the adaptive controller tend to be generally positive, noting the build quality, ease of setup and use, and limitless options that the controller provides, but there are notes that out of the box, there's not a ton you could do with the controller. There's really only 2 buttons and a D-pad on it by itself. It doesn't even come with a joystick. You need to spend an extra $100 on top of the already $100 controller for the adaptive gaming kit in order to have more functions, meaning that this is a $200+ venture for anyone who wants to use this controller with most games on the market today. Makes a great Game Boy controller though. I think it's also important to note that I had a difficult time finding reviews or coverage of this controller from people with disabilities. Lots of the coverage seemed to be celebrating the fact that this controller is a thing that existed now, and not much in the way of how it actually functions for those who may have to use it. Honestly, that was a big barrier to entry for this entire video. There's only so much coverage for these features out there, much less coming directly from gamers with disabilities. I can't say for sure what to chalk this up to, perhaps due to how new and niche some of these features are. There also aren't a ton of disabled voices in games journalism that I could find, so that also makes things more difficult, but I think we at least have a start. And that's kind of what I keep coming back to. It's a start. It's an unfortunate truth that even with all these advancements, none of this is perfect, and some people may have to be left out, which really sucks. Video games and game development are my passion, and I want to be able to share the things that I create with as many people as possible. Games as a medium are so new and unique that it's gonna take a while before games are in a place where everybody will be able to enjoy them no matter what. But it's things like Sven's victory, Kenji Eno's work, and the adaptive controllers that show that we're on the right path. I can only say so much as an able-bodied person, but I think the future looks bright.